Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are tuning in from. I know we have people tuning in from so many different time zones. We are so excited that you are here. My name is Stephanie, and I am with The Novel Neighbor. We are an independently owned and operated bookstore that can be found in St. Louis, Missouri. And I cannot tell you how excited I am for this event today. As many of you might already know, booksellers sometimes get the opportunities to read books ahead of publication. And our book that we're here to talk about, Sundial, I was so lucky, and I read it like 4 months ago and have been like chomping at the bit to hear our authors speak about it, but also to talk to people about it because I want to know other people who have read it. So I could not be more excited for our event today. And so I know that you are not here to hear from me, although I will be back on towards the end. We will be taking question and answers. So please feel free as things are progressing and as the conversation is going. Any questions that you might have that you want us to ask of either of our authors today, please drop them in the comments. Or if you just want to be like, send an encouraging comment, I'll throw them on screen too. But so to get me off the screen and get on the stars of our show, I'm going to introduce them really quickly. So our first author is Gabino Iglesias, who is a writer, professor, book reviewer, editor, and translator living in Austin, Texas. He is the author of Zero Saints and Coyote Songs and the editor of Both Sides. And spoiler, also has a book coming out later this year, so check that out. His work has been translated into 5 languages and optioned for film, nominated for the Bram Stoker Award and the Locus Award, and has won the Wonderland Book Award for Best Novel in 2019. He teaches creative writing at SNHU's online MFA program and runs a series of low-cost writing workshops. Gabino is here today to talk to our incredible author, whose book we are celebrating, Catriona Ward, who was born in Washington, D.C. and grew up in the United States, Kenya, Madagascar, Yemen, and Morocco. She studied English at the University of Oxford and later earned her master's degree in creative writing at the University of East Anglia. Ward won the August Derleth Award for Best Horror Novel for her debut, The Girl from Raw Blood, and again for Little Eve, making her the first woman to win the prize twice. Little Eve also won the Shirley Jackson Award for Best Novel and will be published by Nightfire. And please look at this beautiful cover as I bring our authors onto the screen. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much to both of you for being here today.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you very much. This is great. The world is very small. As Stephanie was going through that, I was remembering I was a judge for the Shirley Jackson Awards that year, and that never came to mind until she just read that thing.
Wow! Oh my God, that's amazing. So you genuinely helped change my life. Thank you.
Oh no, that was you by writing Little Eve. You did that all yourself. But that's not the book that we're here to talk about, Kat. We're here to talk about Sundial. I have the very early copy, so please hold yours up because this is not the cover. And also, I don't know why the folks at Nightfire went with this very mellow pink. Because it doesn't really fit the bill.
It doesn't reflect the horror and stressfulness contained within the covers. No.
Correct. Before we get started, and I have a lot of questions, and I know that folks have a lot of questions that they're going to be either asking you later or dropping in the comments. Would you read for us?
Of course, yes. I'd be absolutely thrilled to. I'll read a very short section by one of my favorite characters. This is, as is my apparently now my style. I seem to have adopted it with the last couple of books, which is very close first person, interlocking first person narratives, which contradict each other and prove very unreliable. And this is Callie, who has got a sort of strange gift and sees people and animals who may or may not be there. And she's 13 years old, and she's got a very unusual way of thinking. So, Callie. We stop for gas, and Mum gets out. I see her blonde hair like a waterfall breathe the rich metal reek that leaks from the pumps. I love smells that are supposed to be bad for you. Glue, gas, bug killer. When she gets back in the car, her mouth is tense. Dumpster Puppy whines and pushes his head against my hand. I see the seatbelt through his transparent ears. She's taking us somewhere secret, Dumpster Puppy says. Better watch out for trouble. She's taking us to Sundial, I say scornfully. You've never been there, but I have. Calm down. Dumpster Puppy is a pessimist. That means someone who knows how things are. But he's good company because we can talk to each other without words. He's right, though. Something's up. The air has a crackly feeling. It's good that Mum let me bring Dumpster Puppy's bones, but I wish I could have brought all the pale ones. They'll be sad without me, my little animals. Usually they nestle in my pockets, sleep in the hollows of my body at night. Now they'll have to wander the house lonely. Dad and Annie don't know how to talk to them. Pale Callie sits beside me, humming and looking out of the window. She knows about Sundial. She's been there. I don't have Pale Callie's bones. I don't know what Pale Callie is, really. Just that she goes wherever I go and always has. I watch the back of Mum's head. I think about what Dad said when he was hugging me goodbye. Mum was putting the bags in the car so she didn't hear. Be careful out there, bud, Dad said, warm in my ear. Dad and I are best buds. If you get scared out there, you call me. Why would I get scared? Your mum, she can be a little unstable. I felt a little thrill of fear because I knew what he meant. The crying, the screaming late at night, always yelling at Dad. She lies, too. I can always tell, even if she doesn't know it herself. For example, Mum doesn't like me, even though she swears she does. I could see her wondering if I would tell him about the slap she gave me. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe it's because it made Mum seem a little more like me, just for a second. And it's a powerful thing to keep a secret. It's a long ride to Sundial, and we're not even out of town yet. Pale Callie and I play warm or pale. This is where I guess whether the people we see through the window are ghosts or not. And Callie then tells me the answer. I point to a kid on roller skates holding her mum's hand. Warm, Pale Callie says. A man sleeping under the freeway is pale, but that was an easy one. He looks pale. The light holds us here for a few moments on red. In the front seat, Mum pushes her hair away, and I look at the back of her slim neck. It's strange how beautiful she is. It's like she's nothing to do with me. Pale Callie yawns and points to a guy on the crosswalk in front of us. Nearly pale, she says. Cancer. He won't last the year. Sad face, I whisper.
That was great. I love the puppy, by the way.
I love the puppy too, yeah.
After that, they go to the abandoned place, and the puppy finds other dead puppies. And I was like, this just turned into a children's book.
Yeah.
So let's start, because you just mentioned a whole bunch of things that were part of my questions, the interlocking narratives. You can't trust anyone in this book. So tell us about your unreliable narrators and what pushes you to create these narratives where we know something's out of place. We know everybody has some sort of mental thing going on, but we don't know who to trust, and everybody has a different story.
Well, it's an interesting sort of phrase, the unreliable narrator, isn't it? Because I actually find writing these perspectives much more lifelike and much more naturalistic than I do any kind of reading any omniscient narrator, because what you're doing is you're exactly it's much more lifelike. You're in the position of a person who is, as much as we do in life, wandering through with no real guide as to what's going to happen. Things all happen arbitrarily. The only information you have is what you're given, and you're viewing it through a very subjective lens. So for me, this sort of so-called unreliable narrator just feels much more like what we go through every day. And I suppose it links up, I think, also to this thing about, reveals or twists. I mean, it just feels so lifelike to me, the experience of having the rug pulled out from under you, having no guide or clues as to what to think about characters or situations, or know what's going to happen. We don't walk into a room and find have a narrator whispering to us clues about what's going to happen or what to think of the people who are standing there. We're all sort of wandering through the dark, quite like these, the way these characters' experience is framed. And I wonder if maybe that's where the discomfort comes from. Because fiction is supposed to make more sense than life, isn't it? it's supposed to be better organized. It's supposed to have character arcs and plot development and an editor, and life just notably lacks any of that order. And I wonder if part of horror and thrillers sort of synchronicity with the sort of first person unreliable narrator comes with that sense of, it's part of that being destabilized by wanting, because we turn to books to make sense of things that don't make sense in life, I think, a lot of the time. And we certainly, I was talking about this earlier with someone, whereby there's that famous there's that bit in, I think it's in Lucy's story in Stephen King, the Stephen King novel, where he writes, the novelist character writes a section on this dog who finds his way back to his family after long months of traveling and arrives unscathed, and they're reunited after years and years. And the editor strikes it out with a big red pen and says, no, this won't do. And and the novelist says, well, but it happened, so it is realistic. And they say, no, it doesn't read right. And I thought that was such an interesting point, and completely right. In that, just because they're facts doesn't mean they read true. Right. And I think all of that comes into play with immersing yourself so deeply in a voice. And I always, particularly with all of them, really. Sorry, I was about to say with Needless Street in particular, but it is all my books. There is this sort of compulsion in me to make, and I do hear how this sounds in my head. Actually, now I'm about to say it. I want to make the reader almost wear look through the character's eyes as if they're wearing them like a skin. And because I think there's something almost horror. There's horror in that, in being trapped so closely in a perspective. Is there's something incredibly frightening and disempowering about it. It's a kind of an act of capture that you're performing on the reader. I'm probably not inviting you very kind of like enticingly to read my book. Come and be captured in this point of view. But I just think there's something really compelling about that first person perspective, which forces us into a place of discomfort.
Yeah, and I think you pulled it off. And not only that, I think we're subconsciously we pick a character. And by being forced to see all of those and you step into all these shoes, I know that, Callie has Pale Callie and Dead Puppy, and, having conversations with this imaginary friend who I thought it's there. But then she's also young, so a little bit less touched by life. So as soon as the maggots showed up, I was done with Rob. Absolutely nuts. But then as soon as Callie showed up, I was like, this is the character that's the most right. Like, I identify with this. I talk to ghosts all the time. I'm a writer. This is what we do. I hear the voices. So it works out really well. There's a lot of fear and horror in this novel, but I feel like it takes two separate roads. When we start, something feels off, but we're in very pretty suburbia, and neighbors are having parties, and people have jobs, and it feels normal. And then there's a little bit of, violence in the couple, and then there's cheating. And so you start going down that route, and it feels very normal. Like, this is just, we're peeling the cover of suburbia, and then the supernatural stuff shows up. And then you keep walking these two parallel sort of horror fear lanes, and they just go like this throughout the whole novel. How the hell did you pull that off?
Well, I'm very relieved to hear that you think that I did.
You did.
This is the question I ask myself each day as I'm sitting down, because I think if it's not so hard that you believe that you can't possibly do it, then what's the point in trying? Right. That's my attitude. I am probably, some might say, I'm giving myself some like unnecessarily steep challenges, but I think also, so I have a love, I love genre. I have a huge love affair with the conventions of genre, and I think the way that they tell the tools they use to tell stories. For instance, if we're talking, I was just thinking, that's so interesting what you were saying about the book almost dresses itself up as like domestic noir
Right.
in the beginning, and then gradually reveals itself. And plot wise, it's me picking a point, picking almost the end point of the story to start at, and then you gradually see how we got there. And the novel sort of meets in the middle, doesn't it? So you're following one storyline this way and the other one this way, and then there's the heart of the book, the fulcrum on which it turns. But I think that all of my love for things like ghost stories and noir, and I think genre is so often used as a word, just a catch-all, isn't it, to describe things that people just don't think are very good. And I think completely the opposite. Yeah. I think that particularly, the Gothic, which I have I think all my books have these strong currents of Gothic running through them, and the ghost story have such powerful means of storytelling that I think that my decision to use those, or the way I gravitate towards those genres, is just me being like pulled in by the power and the expressiveness of the form. And I was saying, this is the best way to tell this part of the story. I also think that there's the sense of moving from one genre to another, I think in itself is discomforting. I think that there's a sort of sense of, you make a compact between reader and writer, don't you? When you open a book, you sense the rules of the world you're in quite quickly. And you know that, for instance, it's a bit like when you watch a romantic comedy, and if there's an aerial shot of New York and a voiceover with some jazz music, then you're in a romantic comedy and nothing too bad is going to happen to you. Right. You hope. So, and I think if you break that covenant with the reader, I think you have to have a really meaningful plot reason to do that, because otherwise it becomes chaos, I think. And I was a bit nervous about it, because I thought, are people going to be okay with this? With moving through a story that demands so much of them, and demands these two different more than two, really, lots of different worlds and perspectives. I think the thing is, like, the journey that Rob particularly herself goes on, how far she comes from where she started out at Sundial in this feral, vast, bleak, endless desert, to the nice home in suburbia, which is all she ever wanted. Yeah. I think the contrast between those two things it just says so much in itself about her and what she's had to do, or what you come to learn she's had to do to get there and to accomplish that change. So for me, it's all about one person's, I suppose, in a simple way of expressing it. Be careful what you wish for, because you might just get it. And she does get what she thought she wanted. But as you know, this book is just, it's all about that age-old question that many people have asked ever since people have been around, really, as in, what makes us who we are, is how much of us is dictated by genetics or upbringing or the past, or by a freak chromosome or something. And I think that her attempt to self-determine, like to forge her own identity and get to that house in suburbia, no matter how it turns out, whether it turns out to actually be this holy grail that she hoped, I think that's part of the same struggle, and that part of that same question that we all ask ourselves is, who the hell are we? And there's also that fear that plays into it, of not being in control of our biological or our psychological makeup, and being at the mercy of forces, much outside ourselves and older than ourselves, and ones that we're completely unaware of. So that's a rather long answer to your question, but I feel like the way the book moves through its stages is very much part of how Rob's battle to determine, to self-determine. And of course, what she learns also is you can't just transcend the past. Yeah, she has to go back to Sundial and confront it. So yeah, which is I think a lesson we all face, sooner or later.
Yeah, sadly. In a way, I saw Rob as a writer, because we always have like this goal, and if we work hard and long enough, we get it. And then we're like her, we're standing there like, okay, so I got this part, and my life is crumbling. What do I do with my 50 spice rack in the kitchen? It looks great, but what do I do now? It's worthless. And you mentioned something about making life harder for the reader, and then previously making things harder for yourself. Number one, going with multiple points of view makes your life harder. And then you decided to go surreal, multiple points of view, and I'm going to write a narrative within a narrative and take it to Arrowwood to make things more complicated. Why did you punish yourself? Is this just masochism, or like did you just have fun in the editing process trying to make it all into a cohesive unit, or where did that come from? Because it seems like at every turn you throw something new at it.
I think yeah. I wouldn't describe it as fun. I think it's storytelling is such a big part of the book, because I think that's really interesting. You identified, you said, you felt the writer's plight in Rob's journey, and I think, I suppose in a sense we just scatter ourselves all over our books anyway, don't we? Like all of our characters are just avatars, for ourselves. But I think particularly with Rob, that storytelling is important. I think she does have this sort of writer-like significance or symbolism, and because she herself, although no one ever reads it, as you say, is a writer, and she processes her experience with these incredibly violent, surreal schoolgirl narratives that she writes in the privacy of her, in the dark of the night, and nobody ever looks at, except Callie does secretly. But it's I find, first of all, it so deeply relatable, because that someone who's trapped, because she's trapped in a deeply stressful situation with, she's built walls around herself, to corral herself into quite a dangerous marriage and a dangerous relationship, and it's a self-made prison, which, as we know, those are the worst, because you've got no one to blame but yourself. And the idea that she transposes this experience into these incredibly, those schoolgirl novels of the 50s and 60s. There's no reason why you should, but like Enid Blyton wrote a lot of them. They're called there's the Mallory Towers series, which are all called like a wild half term in the upper fourth, and mischief again at Mallory Towers, and they're all about white middle-class schoolgirls learning about things, about codes of behavior and honor, and being young women, all while being very healthy on the hockey pitch. Very healthy. It's all very healthy. And I found the idea of someone taking this model, this structure, and turning it into basically a surreal kind of grand guignol, almost violent massacre, a constant violent canvas where these schoolgirls just hatch terrible plots and race around trying to kill each other, all with Rob's family's names. So she writes her family over and over and over again, and giving them putting their names on different characters. Yes, it's definitely an image of the writerly process, isn't it? It's her attempt again to make sense of her own experience. I did also, and I realized that I didn't want them to be too obvious, but there are some clues, shall I say? There are some hints about the narrative in those sections which shed light on the rest of it. And I thought and again, maybe it's asking too much of myself and the reader at the same time again. But the idea that there's a sort of chiming between her mad, violent, created world and the world she's living in. There's a reciprocity between them, and that you can sort of see when you see the two alongside each other that they make sense together. There's a sort of click where they intersect. I found that very interesting to write. It was a nightmare to write. I'll end with that. It was very difficult to write. But then, as I said, I don't. Why do we bother if it's easy? Why would we do it?
Right. I'm glad that you talked about loving genre for a variety of reasons, and the preceding 3 questions were relatively craft based. So let's go down into the bottom of genre as a lover of extreme horror, splatterpunk, you name it. The very short question, Kat, what's up with maggots? Why did you choose maggots for this one, where your work's so cerebral, and then you go, here's maggots, red, squirmy maggots. I love them, by the way, in the book.
Oh,
so
thank you.
Tell us about the maggots.
Yeah. So there's, it's that scene, isn't it, where Rob's husband is inviting her to taste something he's made, and he doesn't really cook. He makes English puddings because he thinks they're really classy. Yeah. So she's sort of resignedly, and you know what it's like. You're busy with something else. She's like, oh, no, I'm busy. And he goes, no, taste it. So she picks up a spoon. She's busy doing something else. She puts a spoon in, and gets it sort of halfway to her mouth before she sees that it's what he's actually asking her to taste is a bowl full of maggots. I said, a heavy-handed metaphor for marriage? No. No.
And then on the robe too.
Oh, and on the robe, and yes, he exactly. He does that trick that he plays on her. I think there's something so upsetting about a maggot because, and I have terrible eyesight as well, which I think also plays into this. I'm really blind. You can see me peering at you like this now. You know what it's like being a horror writer. Your mind always plays around the edges of everything that happens, going, oh, what if, and turning it into something probably fairly innocuous into horror. And I can never look at, maggots. Not that I spend that much time looking at maggots, obviously, but some.
When they show up.
I can never look at them without thinking how easy it would be to mistake them for something else, particularly something quite delicious, maybe like a sort of pudding of some kind, or like oatmeal.
Rice pudding.
They're very visually kind of neutral until you get close enough to realize the difference. I think also, there's a rot in this marriage, isn't there? There is a parasite eating away at the heart of it, and I think, whether they're maggots on the table or maggots in the relationship, there are definitely maggots. And I thought, let's just go there. Oh, also they stink, don't they? And I just thought, there's everything about them is just perfect. It's just perfect, in a sensory way, and they also work. The imagery just seemed to work for that dynamic between Irving and Rob as well. Right. So that's my story about the maggots.
I loved the maggots. Let's talk a little bit about perspective. From the outside, white picket fence, nice house, good-looking couple, 2 kids. And then if you look at her past as well, it was the dream, out in the wilderness, we have our own eggs. And she talks a little bit about that. And each one of those things have like layers underneath that made it absolutely horrible. So you create this awesome perspective, and then throughout the narrative, you just completely obliterate it with darkness. Do you just like to give that to readers, like, this is what we think when we look at something, and now allow me to chop it down into pieces and show you the corpse?
I think there's thank you for that image, that was great.
With no maggots.
No maggots. I think they were very particular choices. there's something about Sundial, which is the facility where Rob grew up, where her parents conducted experiments on dogs. And I think part of the horror for me in that is that everybody there means really well. The intentions are good. It's that sort of frontier thinking, that kind of like unregulated late 60s, early 70s, like MK Ultra mindset of people are genuinely trying to, as they see it, expand the boundaries of human knowledge. But and this is happening, I'm about to quote Jurassic Park, they were so busy, wondering whether they didn't stop to think whether they should. And I think there's something so frightening inherently about human intention that isn't malicious, that isn't evil. There's no malice there in the people performing those experiments. There's only a sort of aspiration towards good and progress. And evil by accident is a powerfully frightening thing, I think. So I found that the compelling thing about it, because if people, if it was like a mad scientist's lab and they were cackling madly over you and rubbing their hands together and doing a Bond villain speech about what they were going to do to you, that's not that frightening. But if people are genuinely have conviction and passion and are convinced that they're good, well, that's how you get genocide, isn't it? That's how you get world wars. So I found that very, very compelling. And I think I think as for where the picket fence, I mean, suburbia is just such a gift, isn't it, really? Because it's you only need to mention the nice lawn and everyone goes, oh, it's something terrible there. It's become, and that's what I love about horror as well, is because it's like a dance between the reader and the writer. And readers are really educated, they're really informed, and they love this elegant back and forth of ideas with you. You don't need to tell a genre reader or a horror reader that suburbia means that there's something lurking underneath. They know, and they're waiting for it. They're waiting for you to show it to them. So that I think is genre's one of genre's greatest kind of elegances and most sophisticated means of expression is this everybody knowing the shape, the generous shape of the genre they're in and working within it.
Awesome. Horror has a very long history of creepy kids. We love that, and we also know that that weird dark space between a little girl becoming a woman.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of psychological things going on. There's hormones. Rob is at the center of this narrative, but Callie for me was like that sidekick that had, there's even a little bit of humor in there. Like she was bummed that mom doesn't like to talk about death and stuff. So she's a very endearing character. She's an artist. Was that sort of like your attempt? Because you can't pummel readers, and you've talked about that dance. Like it can't all be maggots and the rot. And from time to time, we hear from her, and I know it's dark, and I know it's weird, and I know it's surreal, and I know she's talking to a ghost and seeing dead people. But at the same time, it feels light. It feels like you want to spend more time with her. She's really great. You feel sorry for her, even though she has this little murder thing going on. Did you just have fun writing her? Was she, you were giving us that to breathe?
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I loved writing her. I loved writing her because she's very, she's because she is at that age where she's not yet troubled by too many adult sort of sophistications. You do get the purity of her intention, which is that she wants things to turn out well, and she wants to do the right thing, which I think is refreshing, because her intention, at least, I want to do the right thing, however that manifests, is very refreshing. I also think you've just God, you feel for her, because I think being a child and then a teenager is just so almost identical to being an alien landing on a planet, isn't it? Whereby you have to very, very quickly learn all of these things that you just don't know about, and acclimatize and get on with the people you find there. And her sort of determination to navigate all of these complicated grown-up attitudes which she doesn't really understand, and to protect her sister. I think that's very moving. I think we see her intentions a lot more clearly than we see Rob's intentions sometimes throughout the book, and that helps us too, is to hang, to be able to hang a bit of to make her into, to hang a bit of our good wishes on her is a bit of a relief, I expect. Also, she talks in emojis.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of the
sad
time.
face.
Yeah, sad face. And I found that quite relatable too. And there's a bit, because I've after I've been writing it for a day, at one point I actually did it to my partner by accident, and I was like, I just went, oh, sad face. I was like, red screaming face. And then I thought, yes, that is what would happen. So I put that in the book as well. Rob catches herself doing it sometimes, irritably stops herself, because it's, there's something so direct and simple about her objectives, and not simple about the way she carries them out at all, but she's very much motivated by care. And a young person who doesn't know what they're dealing with, trying to make the best of things, it's very moving,
Yeah.
And also she has a pet ghost puppy that she found in a dumpster.
Yes, and a penchant for bones and
She likes bones.
art and other things.
Yes.
There is the first monster that we're introduced to here is the husband. God, that's a despicable character. And yet, it's an interesting, because you could talk about him being sort of like a vampire, sucking all the joy out of life and damaging relationships between mother and daughter. And then he's just a regular guy, except the type of regular guy who would lay hands on a woman and be like, just wait, you'll see what I'm going to do to you. But he's floating. He's over here. He flies into the narrative. He does his thing. There's a phone call or a text, and
he's an absent force for most of it, isn't he? Yeah, that's right. And he, because I think the interest lies in, it's not about him, the book. It's about his effect on Rob and on his family. I think that you're so right. I think the frightening thing about him is that he is a regular guy. There's nothing particularly, he doesn't have a pair of horns. He's just a guy. He's like, a slightly spoiled guy. And there was a kind of, we have plenty of examples of that in life, and in the media, of entitled, wealthy white men who get away with murder and with things, and with huge abuses of power. It seemed to me that it was very, it wasn't much of a reach. Some people I've spoken to are upset by it. It's upsetting. It is upsetting because it's an abusive relationship. But what people's problems are, and I understand this because it comes from frustration. And if you are, they're upset that Rob doesn't get out, or that she doesn't do anything, that she stays. But that is a couple of times that question comes up of, well, why doesn't she just leave? And unfortunately, I think the power of the cage she's created is very strong, but also people don't. I mean, I think that in a sense, the strength of people's reactions to it is a reflection that actually deep down they do understand that. They wouldn't be so mad if they really thought she could leave and that I'd done do you know what I mean? If they really were arguing with it on a factual level, they're upset because they understand why she doesn't.
Right.
which I think it's a sort of backhanded compliment. But I do, it's a difficult thing, because and sometimes I think about it a lot, because I write a lot of things that I don't necessarily enjoy spending my days down there doing, but I think you have to. That's you have to sort of look it in the face, and there's a lot. I mean, for instance, that the way the dogs are treated in their storyline is upsetting too. The reason I wrote it is because I find it upsetting, and I'm doing that thing which I hopefully horror is so brilliant at doing, whereby I'm making myself vulnerable. I'm showing the reader what I'm afraid of and what I find abhorrent about this, and then you hold out your hand and you say, "Are you afraid of this too?" And then hopefully you walk through the dark together. That's the idea. It's not, and it's a strange thing, because you're constantly forced, and you must have this too, constantly forced to spend days and hours in places that aren't very nice, and basically you spend your days in a sort of hallucinatory cave of your own fears and nightmares, and then you share them with others. That seems to be a pretty good summary of the job. But yeah,
I'm gonna steal that.
I mean, do you find that you, because I know you're a genre writer as well, you must find that you have to dredge some of the stuff up from the deep, don't you?
You said something about how we splatter ourselves all over our books,
Yeah.
and I think we do that. I think it's perfectly fine, because a lot of writers do both, but I feel like some of us don't need to go to therapy, because
Right. Yeah.
And then it's the anger and the pain and the grief and the guilt and all, and the fear and all of that comes in the work. You've been talking a lot about that relationship between readers and writers. I was really scared when we sold the next book, because suddenly you have all this pressure, and then I realized I shouldn't worry, because it doesn't matter how dark things get. Horror readers keep turning to horror as a sort of comfort food. It's like, yes, it'll make me uncomfortable and unsettled and scared, but I can control that. I can close the book. I can talk to my book club about it. It's sort of like this managed mayhem. Why do you think they keep coming back?
Will you share I think sharing. So I think part of the reason why horror, it's got this double-edged sword, whereby part of the reason it's so popular is the same reason why there can be a little sort of turning up of the nose at it, which is that it's sharing fear is a really we're not really supposed to do that as grown-ups, are we? We're like, only children are afraid of things, and there's something almost shaming about the emotion of fear. And people don't like to acknowledge it. So this, as you say, this controlled release of it, this organized kind of sharing and reciprocity and exchange of fears through books and through words, it's something really empowering for people who understand it. And I think it perhaps it seems almost, in the most literal sense, like repulsive to those who don't. They do not get why anyone would want to write or read or talk about or partake in this genre, whereas actually it's it's incredibly powerful and compassionate genre. All horror has to be based on compassion, doesn't it? Because otherwise, how can the writer write something that they don't feel strongly about, and how can the reader be afraid if they don't care? Right. We're it's all predicated on this exchange of fears and compassion. As you can see, I feel very strongly about this, and I'm a great advocate for. I just think it's such a generous and incredibly powerful means of telling stories. And you have to, as you say, you have to give of yourself quite deeply. But that's where the reward lies too, is you you sort of transform your own fears into something outside yourself. They transcend you, and it becomes not a story about you anymore. So you've lifted them out of the personal and made them into something new, which is quite a powerful act of magic, really.
Yeah. I agree. Without empathy, horror fails.
That's right. Yeah.
I think we're about to start with the questions, but I want to steal your words, Kat, and give them back to you as a very short blurb of this novel, because I read this line and I laughed to myself for 5 minutes. So here is my blurb for Sundial.
Okay.
She looks small and golden and neat, but she has weird stuff inside her. That is my blurb of your book. There you have it. Please use it.
I'm so happy. Thank you.
Oh my God. That's like perfect. I mean, we could just like end it here. I know we have great questions. Don't worry, everyone. We're joking, but oh my gosh. And I just have to come back on and say, because I'm like I've written so many things down that I'm just like, now I don't even know what I wrote, but your conversation was so interesting. I'm sure it was driving you a little bit bonkers, Gabino, but I think it's so appropriate that there was a dog barking in the background for at least part of this conversation.
I know.
It had to happen.
It's a ghost dog.
Exactly. It's our
No one else heard the dog, Stephanie. There's no dog.
And you just gave me chills, Kat. That's right.
She has weird stuff inside her.
Weird stuff. And I definitely laughed out loud when you were like, the maggots. What's the deal with the maggots? Because I think that's really something I wrote in the word.
It's a fair question.
It's amazing. And that tells you how important it was to all of us as readers. So we have some great questions. The first one, Kat, specifically for you, what is something that you miss about these characters now that you don't get to spend every day with them?
I think you get to know them. I think it's always the same. By the time you finish a book, you've built the world, and it's so wonderful, because when you start, it's terrifying. There's just nothing. It's just nothing. It's just white, and you've got to build everything. And and then by the time you've done all the work, and you know them so well, and they've come to there's writers often say this, but it is true. They organically start to have make decisions and do things which you didn't expect. And I once you get to that magical place where it's a world you stepped into, as opposed to a world you're kind of frantically building brick by brick around you, it's so hard to leave, because then you have to start all over again. I think I'll miss Callie, because I have a lot of time for very odd, lonely children. I think most writers were at one point an odd, lonely child. I don't know what you think about that, Gabino, but I would say it's a good bet.
I think we're all still kind of weird children.
Yes, exactly. I don't know why I used the past tense there.
We just have knives now. That's about it. We can play with fire.
Stab people with our pens now, yeah. So I'll miss her a lot. I also this book, I think, was probably, and I'm hearing this in my head as I'm about to say it now as well, it was probably one of the more personal ones I've written, in that, I took things, not events, but feelings from my childhood and traveling around the world and things like that, where and transposed them into a desert scientific facility, and into other people's upbringings, and that it was interesting, because I learned about myself from them, from these characters, which I didn't really expect to happen. There's that kaleidoscope thing happened, where obviously, and it surprises you every time, no matter how many times it happens. It surprises you every time, whereby you realize that each character is a sort of refraction of you off the page, on the page, and you think, oh, I never knew that about I never, like, for instance, I never knew how quite how lonely I was when I was that age. So I miss them in that sense. They feel intimate. They do feel, they're the weird stuff inside me. Oh my God, did you see that? Sorry, the light just came on. Sorry. I'm just going to turn it off. It's freaking me out.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing a different dog now because I'm muted. I'm hearing a different dog somewhere.
Oh God, that was really startling. Anyway, they know we're talking about them. Yes, but I miss spending time with them because I miss spending time with them, and I miss that kind of eerie sense of having a conversation with yourself, but also with people who seem to be outside yourself as well.
Sure. This next question is for both of you, and it ties in really well, actually. Speaking as, since we just covered that you might still be weird children, just in grown-up form, did you always have an affinity for the horror genre? How did you end up here, for both of you? Did you always read it? Did you ever think that you were going to write it? Or has that been the game plan the entire time?
I was ridiculously young when I found the work of Horacio Quiroga. There's a translated collection called Tales of Love, Death, and Madness, or Tales of Love, Madness, and Death. And it was gory and disgusting and amazing and weird and scary. And then a friend gave me Richard Lehman's Endless Night. Endless Night. And I didn't know you could do that with words. And I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do for a living. I get to do it. I get to go into those dark places that Kat was talking about and absolutely mess myself up for a long time and then share it with the world.
I still suffer from these. I have something called hypnagogic hallucinations, which are hallucinations that happen just on the cut. Gabino's nodding his head. A surprising amount of writers experience this, actually. A higher proportion than high proportion. And when I was 13, we used to, because we moved around all around the world, but we came back every summer to this house on Dartmoor. I hesitate to say, I must say it's not this house, despite the light show that just keeps happening. This thing, it started when I was about 13, and because Gabino, you were talking about, that age, that interim age where you're not an adult, but you're not a child anymore either. And as things started happening whereby I was just falling asleep, and then I would feel a hand in the small of my back pushing me very firmly out of bed. And I'd fall quite hard on the floor. And I could feel every finger on the hand, every place where the finger pressed into my flesh. And that feeling as well when there's someone else in the room and you can't see them or hear them, but you just know they're there. And I just knew there was someone in the room with me. And it was probably the most frightening thing that's ever happened to me. I don't think I've even because now I know what they are. I sort of I have a chat with them and go to sleep. But back then, there was no internet. I had no idea what this was. And as far as I was concerned, it was a goddamn ghost. And it was staring into this the darkest and most frightened I've ever been, staring into this chasm of fear. I don't think fear like that exists in the daylight world. And when I first read my first ghost story, which was The Monkey's Paw by W.W. Jacobs, I felt that again, that it's like a hand reaching inside you. And I thought, oh, this is it. This is like you, Gabino. This is where you put it. This is the cage you build to head for the demon. This is where you house it. And yeah, like you, I have just never looked back really. And I think there's such a power in becoming comfortable with fear, in losing one's fear of fear. It sounds like a contradiction in terms, but it can be incredibly liberating. And I think writing has become it becomes a huge part of that, is because you can't be at the mercy of the fear while you're writing. You have to be able to drive the team to a certain extent, the team of horses.
Thank you both so much for sharing that. I just continue to be, and all of you both, and I'm sure as everyone else who is watching is also wondering that. We have a great question coming in from Matt, and I want to make sure we get to it. Matt is wondering, Matt first of all says, hello from Jersey, wants to know from both of you how difficult the middle of the book is for you. Do you ever start to doubt what you've gotten yourself into, and do you just say screw it and keep going?
I'll let you start with this one.
I wake up thinking, like, what the hell did I get myself into now? He sounds like a writer, so he probably knows that there's like plotters and pantsers. I'm a pantser, so I have a series of scenes, and I have this sort of story in my head, and I know there's a beginning, and then a middle, and then an end. And that usually I can write it in about 3 pages. So I need all of the connective tissue. And then when I start getting into that, I'm like, oh my God, why am I doing this to myself? And then there's this thing that happens where you have a brilliant idea after you've written 20, 30,000 words. And then it's like dropping a huge pebble in a pond. And then the editing takes on this ripple effect. And then you have to go back and rewrite the whole thing to make it better. And I also believe that at the end of every book, which the book never ends, then you edit, and then you edit again, and then you edit again, and then your editor tells you what to edit again, and it only stops when it's out. And then you start the next one, and you go like, I don't know how to do it. How do you write a book? I forgot everything that I learned with the last one. It's a completely different story, and I'm lost, and I'm scared, and I'm just going to push through because this is what I do for a living, and it brings me joy to feel that I'm just a little lost boy in a very dark room, and I don't have a flashlight. And that's how the wonderful writing process goes off in this house, in a very tiny room with no lights and what my friends like to call my suicide music. And then I just push forward, and and that's about it. So insecurity, part of the gig, just like rejection. Keep going, Matt.
It's amazing, isn't it? How every time you finish a book, you think, "Oh, I can write books now. I know how to do that." And then you start the next one, and you're like, "No, I don't. I really don't." I think there are lots of days where you want to tear your own arm off and beat yourself to death with it, just so you don't have to wake up tomorrow and do it all over again. But and that is called the middle of the book. Yes, because somehow the beginning and the end quite crystalline, or quite often but unfortunately you do need a middle, and that's how you get between the two, apparently. I think that redrafting thing can be, God, so deadly. When you realize that when you're writing very fast on the hoof, and that's when you're doing your best stuff, because it's coming very spontaneously. You don't slow down for long enough for the inner critic to say anything. But every day you write, you have to redraft almost everything you've written before, because it's growing. And if you don't do that in real time, you'll forget it. Yes, it's difficult. But then the thing is, I hate writing sometimes. I love having written. I love the end and I'm like, that's done. No, it's a long, lonely walk in the dark, and you've got to take care of yourself while you're doing it, I think.
Matt, I hope I feel like that was a great answer to your question, Matt. They continue to push through the middle of the book that it sounds like you may be writing. Really quickly, before we sign off today, there is one question that I'm it's my personal question. Full honesty, transparency. But I think because we have both of you here in conversation about this, it's so important to hear your answers to this. Horror is such a fun, evolving genre. I loved what you were saying earlier, Kat, about compassion being at the root of any good horror novel and important for you to invest in it. Both of you are becoming the new faces of horror, and are certainly making huge waves within the genre. What do you hope for the horror genre moving forward as a whole? Where do you take that however you want to take it, I guess, too?
I mean, I think I love the way that horror is broadening out in terms of subject matter and just in its scope. Like, I love that we've got like Gretchen Falker Martin's Manhunt. I think it's just genius, bit of body horror. I love that we've widened the aperture of it's quite mainstream. It's published by Tor, isn't it? So it's it's a mainstream like Big Five book, and I love that we're allowing we've got more, because these things have always been around. They've always been written, and horror's always traditionally been the refuge of the people on the edge and the slightly different, the weird, lonely children. And I love that there's much more acknowledgement now in the in publishing at large, that it's a broad church that has room for everyone.
Love it. Yeah. First thing that comes to mind is diversity. We are seeing, historically, horror was straight white guys writing about the other because they were afraid.
Right.
And now from, trans women, people of color, we had Sylvia as a New York Times bestseller, Mexican woman. We had Stephen Graham Jones as a New York Times bestseller, Blackfeet, Native American. It's wonderfully diverse nowadays, and it's also no longer at the kids table. So it used to be like we had one horror writer. We had Stephen King. He was our pillar, and we knew that he was mainstream. And I think a lot of publishers said, we have Stephen King. We don't need any more. And now go through Tor Nightfire's catalog. The Big Five are just picking up horror books and saying, I think the same thing that happened with Wakanda Forever. It happened to us. Like, we can't have a black superhero. No one's going to go watch that movie. Yeah. And then Black Panther came out and it exploded. And at some point, we came together collectively, and horror has always been queer, and now LGBTQ writers are taking over the scene. Writers of color, women, international writings. We're seeing novels in translation. So it's a wonderful space for absolutely everybody, and that's why the new wave is hitting us from like so many angles. It's like, you want horror mixed with trauma? Here's something. Do you want it pulpy? Here you have it. Do you want it with crime? Hello, I'm here. Whatever you want, we have it. And so people just keep coming to horror, and it'll keep growing. And hopefully we'll be the biggest thing in the world by next year. World domination next.
It's so exciting, though, isn't it? Because it's always been there, but now it's being allowed to bloom and in the bigger arenas.
It is. I'm so excited. And this conversation has been, like I said, it's so wonderful to hear you both discuss both your Sundial and in the horror genre as a whole. And I'm super excited. I mean, we just expanded our shelf. We just redid the store so that horror had more room to breathe, because she was getting too tight. She didn't have room for any face outs. She was feeling a little, and she's looking great. So anyone who's in St. Louis, come check her out. She's looking wonderful. She's got a lot of room to breathe now. Thank you both so much. Before we sign off, I want to make sure that everyone knows that they can order Sundial from us. I will throw up a link right here, and this link really will take you to a place where you can order a whole ton of horror. So keep that in mind. But Sundial's here, and Kat, you were so wonderful. These book plates, these signed book plates that you got to us all the way from across the pond are incredible. They're beautiful.
Gold pen. I only sign in gold pen these days.
That's a great vibe. That's what we need. That's what we need personally. But so please know that if you put an order for that, we will make sure you get one of these beautiful signed book plates. Kat, Gabino, thank you so much. This was so wonderful. For a delightful conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much, Gabino, for such a great talk. I loved it.
Thank you, Kat. And thank you for writing this.
Oh, and thank you to everyone who came and heard us talk horrible things.
Yeah. and buy the book. But
oh yeah, buy the book.
You can buy it everywhere. I'm not gonna judge you because I don't know where you live. But if there's a local indie bookstore, get it from your local indie bookstore. They're more than happy to talk to you and send it to your house. And some people will just drive it or they'll bring it outside to your car. Just support indie bookstores.
Indie bookstores are willing to do lots of stuff for you.
Yes.
Let me tell you. Oh my gosh, Kat, I would have been devastated. You know how we were talking about what happens if you have a conversation with somebody and then you think about it and you realize you forgot to say something? This is certainly not important, but I want you to know that I wore snake earrings today so that I matched the cover of your book. That was really to be.
Oh, thank you. And I wore my little sun necklace. So together we are Sundial.
We're Sundial. We're the cover of Sundial. That is not important for anyone else who's watching, and I get that.
It was important for me.
Thank you so much, everyone. We will see you next time, and hopefully maybe in the future we'll see you in person. So
yeah,
I love that.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you, Stephanie. Have a good one.
Take care.